For these well-known individuals, life on the fast track has abruptly stopped. Let's go to the courtrooms where these lawbreakers who believed they were above the law will face the moment of truth.
Disclaimer.
Few persons can rival Joaquin Arvaldo Guzman Loera, infamously known as El Chapo, in the world of narcotics and cartels. El Chapo Guzman, a well-known drug lord, is currently appearing in U.S. federal court to be sentenced. Take a seat in the courtroom as we examine the man's response to his sentence, who is regarded as the world's most potent drug trafficker and cartel boss. El Chapo Guzman, who was born into a low-income farming family in Sonora, rose from his position as a neighborhood marijuana dealer to that of one of the most influential drug lords in history. He quickly founded the Sinaloa cartel and advanced to becoming the leading drug lord. Using long-distance tunnels and distribution units, he controlled the mass manufacturing and shipment of cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine to the US and Europe. Forbes listed El Chapo as one of the most powerful persons in the world due to his wealth and influence. In fact, he was compared to Pablo Escobar, another powerful Colombian drug lord. But when El Chapo took part in the assassination of Guadalajara Archbishop Cardinal Posadas Ocampo, things would get serious for him. He was apprehended in 1993 during a turf dispute between cartels, accused with the Cardinal's murder and given a 20-year prison term. On January 19, 2001, El Chapo bribed several jail guards and made his way out of the federal maximum security prison, where he was being held in an escape that would shock the entire globe. The governments of Mexico and the United States put a combined $8.8 million reward on information that led to his capture when he was a fugitive. But it would take an additional 13 years, and El Chapo would finally be apprehended again in 2014. This appeared to be El Chapo's downfall from the perspective of the Mexican government. But once more, he showed no respect for the law.
Then, he sits down, appearing to remove his sandals, and then he vanishes.
Using a tunnel that friends had constructed into his cell, El Chapo Guzman escaped from prison once more in 2015 in a maneuver that was on par with the legendary Houdini.
A tunnel that was his highway to freedom. Opening the tunnel up to the press, the authorities show a well-resourced operation with electricity, an air supply, and this makeshift minecart adapted from a motorcycle, presumably used to move earth and people along its rails.
El Chapo, unluckily, was not able to avoid the law for very long because he was apprehended again in January 2016. After being quickly extradited this time, he was charged with multiple offenses in the US, including conspiracy to produce and distribute drugs, using guns to advance drug-related offenses, and operating an ongoing criminal enterprise. El Chapo was found guilty in September 2019 of all the counts brought against him, including leading the Sinaloa cartel. He received a sentence of 30 years in addition to life in jail without the possibility of parole.
His face says it all. The most powerful drug lord ever to live, reduced to tears in the hands of U.S. federal agents.
The world would stop when the most powerful drug lord in history was seen sobbing during his sentencing. The next case we cover is that of Lee Manuel Rios, a small-time gang boss who brutally murdered an 18-year-old. Let's take a seat at Springfield's Hampton Superior Court, where Lee Manuel Rios was set to receive his punishment for Kenneth Lopez's murder. White and Calhoun Streets in Massachusetts North End, Kenneth Lopez, then 18, and Lee Manuel Rios, also 18, took a taxi to an unidentified location in March 2015. But Lopez would ultimately be found dead on March 25th at noon from numerous gunshot wounds. Lee Rios, a violent member of the Latin Kings who dealt drugs and committed acts of violence in the city, was soon connected to the murder.
So Lee Rios and Kenneth Lopez were both Latin Kings. Now, Lee Rios felt disrespected by Kenneth Lopez. So Lee Rios starts going around and telling everybody he's going to kill Kenneth Lopez.
There were rumors that Lopez, another gang member, and Rios fell out, though it wasn't made clear why. Rios, on the other hand, approached Lopez and assured him that his only goal was to make things right. He even offered to assist Lopez in resolving a conflict with another person. Rios savagely murdered the teenager at Dwight and Calhoun Streets after the two chose to ride in a taxi together. 5 shots were fired at Lopez, 2 of which hit him in the head.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, evidence that you will see and hear in this case will show you that Lee Rios backed up his words and did what he said he was going to do when he killed Kenneth Lopez in the early morning hours of March 24th, 2015.
Rios is said to have taken the deceased's weapons from him after shooting Lopez. Other Latin Kings members who knew about the murder gave testimony that Rios was eager to kill Lopez and even boasted about the deed afterwards.
Count 1, murder in the first degree. You upon your oaths say that the defendant is guilty on a theory of deliberate premeditation and a theory of extreme atrocity and cruelty.
Rios was ultimately found guilty of the crimes against him and given a life sentence without the chance of parole, in addition to an extra 14 to 15 years on the gun charges.
As to count 1, jury having convicted you of murder in the first degree, sir, I am sentencing you to MCIC injunction for the term of your life without the possibility of parole.
Though Abel Gallegos killed and severely abused an innocent woman, he did not express regret during his sentencing.
And it may be symbolic, but I'm going to impose the maximum sentence just because you deserve it.
Before the sentencing, let's take a seat at the Jefferson County District Court, where the specifics of this terrifying crime were being presented.
We have people sobbing today. If there's any tears, they should be shed for Miss Duran.
According to accounts, the mother of 2, 28-year-old Simone Duran, was found dead next to the garage in Golden, Colorado, November 5th, 2018. Duran was the target of 36-year-old drug trafficker Abel Gallegos, Rene Rosales, and Alfonso Quintana, after Duran recognized Quintana in a lineup as a suspect in an attempted murder investigation in a different county. After responding on social media, Abel Gallegos and Duran planned to meet up in early November 2018 at Rosales' location in Denver. Duran was reportedly lured to a parking area where Quintana was waiting for him by Gallegos and Rosales after they left the house together. After beating Duran up in the parking lot, Quintana and Gallegos threw her in the back of their vehicle and drove her to a secluded area of Golden. Gallegos and Quintana left the scene after shooting Duran 10 times, but when Rosales and Gallegos returned, they doused her body in gasoline and lit it on fire.
They miss her and they ask about her every day. They wake up in the middle of the night crying for her.
Her corpse was eventually found by authorities after emergency personnel were dispatched to react to reports of a fire. After a few days, all 3 individuals were taken into custody, with Gallegos being detained on an unrelated offense prior to his formal charges and linkage to the murder.
This was a horrific crime. I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life.
Gallegos' terrible act of murder was not surprising, given that at the time of Dern's murder, he was already serving a federal probation sentence for a different offense. His parole had been revoked 8 times before this murder conviction, which would be his 6th felony conviction overall. Gallegos was found guilty of the accusations against him and given a life sentence without the possibility of parole, plus an extra 163 years to make sure he wouldn't get out this time. His expression was a reflection of lack of regret at the court's decision. The man, also known as Violence, George Geweld Thomas, was all smiles for the camera while receiving his sentence. We'll learn more about this criminal case and see the defendant's response to his sentence by traveling to the Western Cape High Court. George Geweld Thomas, also known by his stage name Violence, was the purported leader of the 28th gang, one of the most violent in Cape Town. As a matter of fact, Thomas and his group plagued Cape Town, committing numerous murders and extortions in their quest to defeat the Clever Kids, a rival gang.
In some instances, it is some of our officials. You must understand that a very feared man.
The 28s had made 6 attempts in the course of 2 years to kill Clever Kids mobster Curtis Ketchawayo Esther Heisen. Before Curtis was shot and killed in 2010, 7 more individuals died as a result of this effort. Witnesses who were scheduled to testify in Thomas's racketeering and conspiracy trial made up the majority of the murder victims. Geweld Thomas and 18 other members of the 28s gang were charged with 166 counts, including possession of a firearm, theft, and attempted murder after these 7 victims were killed. Just Thomas was found guilty on 53 of these counts. During his trial, he ordered the death of multiple other state witnesses while he was incarcerated. In an effort to reduce his sentence, Gewald's defense attorney, Janos Malalik, attempted to portray him as an innocent guy who had been wrongfully imprisoned. Gewald's attorney claims that his client lives in his mother's backyard, sells fish for a living, and doesn't smoke or have a bank account. The prosecution swiftly refuted this assertion, pointing out to the court that Geweld Thomas had already been found guilty of murder at the age of 20 and of breaking into a house when he was only 9 years old. He had assaulted a jail warden and made 1,300 calls to his gang associates each month while he was incarcerated. Geweld said he attacked the warden because at Brandville prison, the warden had sexually harassed him. Additionally, he used intimidation to force jail guards to obey his commands.
We are busy with further investigations in that regard, because in our case we have to investigate if any of our officials participated in the breach of security.
Ultimately, in June 2015, Geweld received 7 life sentences, one for each of the 7 killings he had carried out between 2008 and 2010. The criminal boss appeared unfazed by the prospect of spending the rest of his life in a maximum security jail, even though the punishment for his crimes was appropriate. Remarkably, the man they call Violence was grinning broadly as he was given his sentence. The next defendant was a police officer who rose to become the head of a major drug cartel. Indeed, he was so strong that up until his 2012 arrest in the U.S. District Court in Texas, he was listed among Mexico's most wanted drug lords. Jorge Costilla Sanchez, one of the most violent cartel commanders in Mexico, is currently awaiting sentencing. In the 1990s, Jorge Costilla Sanchez started working as a police officer, but by 1992 or 1995, he had turned from working for the government to working against it. He had started working for drug traffickers and had even started his own kidnapping ring after fleeing the police. Soon after, he attracted the attention of Oziel Cardenas Guillen, the head of the Gulf Cartel, which was then actively engaged in cross-border drug trafficking. After Cardenas was arrested in 1999, Costilla Sanchez, who had attained the rank of lieutenant by the late 1990s, took over as the Gulf Cartel's new head. After threatening to assassinate 2 U.S. law enforcement officials in Mexico with other cartel members, Costilla Sanchez faced charges in the U.S. Aside from that, he was already facing drug trafficking accusations in the nation. But because of his immense influence and authority, he was able to go free. Few individuals outside the cartels knew who Costilla Sanchez was, since he had experience in law enforcement and understood the value of evasion. Prior to his arrest, just 2 pictures of him were ever released to the public. Not until September 12, 2012, was Costilla Sanchez ultimately taken into custody without opening fire.
El aseguramiento de Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sánchez, alias El COS, se llevó a cabo aproximadamente a las 18:15 horas del día de ayer.
After being extradited to the U.S. on September 30th, 2015, he entered a not guilty plea to accusations of murder, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Costilla Sanchez eventually entered a guilty plea to 2 charges of assault on federal investigators and conspiracy to possess narcotics with intent to distribute cocaine and cannabis after a protracted legal struggle. Costilla Sanchez received a life sentence on September 26, 2017. In addition, he was mandated to forfeit $5 million, the sum from which it was determined he had benefited from his involvement in narcotics trafficking. If you want to see more questionable cops and insane arrests, click the next video on screen.